At the beginning of the story, there are two friends who are discussing their plans to go to the town. They plan to do so because the long college vacation has just arrived. This short-haired girl is named Sloane, while the long-haired one is named Katie. It is known that they will go to the town to work on an organic farm for a month, and the plan is that the money they earn from working will be used to shop in New York City. Not long after, Katie's mother came over to them. She already knew that during the long college vacation this year, Sloane and Katie would be working at the organic farm. She said that she had contacted Katie's the uncle, named Jason, to ride them both. Katie's the uncle also happened to live in near the town than want to work. The next day, Katie's the uncle arrived, and the two of them immediately said goodbye to the mother. On the way, the uncle explained that Katie and Sloane could stay overnight at his house before going to the organic farm, because the location of the farm is in a fairly isolated place. Then Katie told Sloane that the uncle was a state official. Long story short, they finally arrived at the uncle's house and were immediately welcomed by the uncle's wife, named Gemma. Then the uncle told Katie and Sloane to rest. In the evening, the uncle approached them. He told them that he would not be able to take them to the organic farm tomorrow, because he had some urgent duty to attend to. The next day, the uncle drove them to the bus stop. But unfortunately, the bus would only arrive in an hour or two. Katie, who knew that the uncle must to attend his duty, told him to leave immediately, while the two of them will relax here first. The uncle who turned out to be super protective. He also asked Katie to keep him informed every day while they were at the organic farm. He also told Katie to give a message using a code letter based on the alphabet. Suppose today starts with the letter like the word apple or avocado, tomorrow starts with the letter B, and the day after tomorrow starts with the letter C, and so on. After they understood, the uncle finally left the place. Then Sloane and Katie stopped by a store to take a toilet, but the shopkeeper said that toilet was not used right now. Then she suggested Katie and Sloane try to go to cafe on cross of the street. Then two of them going to the cafe while waiting for the bus to arrive. On the cafe, the ugly cafe owner looked at them in a quite flirtatious way. At the same time, suddenly came two handsome men who also wanted to order food. These two men are a pair of brothers. The older brother is named Jed, and the younger brother is named Lucas. Here Jed and Lucas ask about what is the purpose of Katie and Sloane coming to this town. After knowing the goal is to go to an organic farm, they also invite Katie and Sloane to just come with them, because their house in the same direction as the location of that farm. But Katie, who felt she had just gotten to know Jed and Lucas, refused and would still choose to leave by bus alone. There was finally Jed and Lucas left them. Until when Jed and Lucas are preparing to move to his car, Sloane tries to persuade and seduce Katie so that them both just come with Jed and Lucas. After being successfully seduced by Sloane, in the end, they decided to hitch a ride with Jed and Lucas. In the middle of a long journey, Katie and Sloane were a little worried, because Jed actually took them to another place. Here Jed told them not to worry. Not long after, they arrived at Jed and Lucas' parents' house. Jed also explained that the farmers would soon come to their house to collect supplies. After that, Jed and Lucas' biological mother appeared, who was very friendly. The mother told the two girls to come in. Seeing the mother's friendliness, Katie and Sloane finally calmed down a little, because they felt that this family was a good people. Even when they were inside, the mother immediately served them with warm tea. At the same time, the uncle asked again how Katie was doing. On this day, Katie immediately replied to the message that she was fine and ended with the word apple as a code. But after drinking the tea, Sloane realized that the drink had been anesthetized. Sloane quickly invited Katie to hurry away from the house. Unfortunately, the anesthetic has started to react, until making the two girls faint. The next day, showing two containers in the middle of the forest. Not long after, people came out of the two containers, and it turned out that it was Sloane and Katie who were already in chains. Then the two girls immediately shouted for help. Then Jed came over to them and told them to shout even louder, because no matter how loud they shouted, no one would be able to hear. Then Jed explained that now Sloane and Katie would temporarily live in a container before being sold abroad. A few minutes after that, a man named Boris arrived. It is known that Boris is the boss of Jed and Lucas in that a human trafficking business. Then Boris said that the Katie's uncle kept giving messages to Katie's cell phone, which was already in his hands. For that, Boris forced Katie so that she could reply to the message, so that her uncle would not be suspicious. Boris also knew that at the end of the previous message, Katie wrote the word apple as a code. Sloane replied by explaining that the uncle always asked for a code by writing the word apple in every message. Hearing this, Boris immediately replied to his message, which ended with the word apple. The scene moves to the uncle who has just finished bathing and asks his wife Gemma if Katie and Sloane have replied to his message. The wife said that Katie had just replied to the message. But when it was opened, the uncle was a little worried, because today Katie should have given the code starting with the letter B. The wife also tried to explain that Katie and Sloane were not childs anymore, so there was no need to worry. Back to Katie and Sloane, they were to be bathed using the emergency shower. But at the same time, suddenly a sheriff named Andrew managed to find them. Here Katie and Sloane are very happy because finally they both can survive. However, the sheriff turned out to be just acting, because he is part of Jed and Lucas' plot. Then the sheriff also asked for a service before the two girls were sold. After enjoying Katie, the sheriff was seen returning to the police station. Not long after, Sloane came to Katie's container, and it seemed that Katie was devastated by what the sheriff had just done. On the other hand, Katie's uncle, who was worried about Katie and Sloane, tried to contact the organic farm. He was made even more anxious when he found out that the two girls were not at the farm. A few hours later, the scene moves to Jed and Lucas, who come with a man who is a cigarette man. It turns out that the cigarette man also wants to ask for a service before the two girls are sold. And this time, the cigarette man appointed Sloane as the woman he chose. When he was in the container, the cigarette man acted rude to Sloane, before he finally carried out his depraved actions. At the same time, Jason the uncle apparently went to the police station in order to make easier find Katie and Sloane. Unfortunately, it will be in vain, because the case will be handled by the sheriff, who previously raped Katie. Here, the uncle tells him that he is a state official, who is none other than an FBI agent. Then the uncle told him that he needed police help to find two girls named Katie and Sloane. He was sure they had been kidnapped, because they were not at the organic farm where they were headed. Plus, they had also given the wrong message code. Hearing this, the sheriff promised to find Katie and Sloane as soon as possible. The scene returns to the forest, where now they will be visited by people who want to return to ask for services. Still unknown who it is, but Jed and Lucas look terrified and immediately covered the two girls with a cloth. Not long after, the person came wearing a piggy mask. Here, the person chose Sloane to be his prey. After finishing, still unknown what the person did earlier, it was clear that Sloane looked very shocked and scared. Katie tried to calm Sloane down by saying that they could definitely leave this place safely. On the other hand, the uncle was seen coming to a cafe around the bus stop at that time. The uncle tried to ask the cafe owner if he had ever seen these two girls, while showing a photo. The cafe owner, who still remembered, he immediately told him that they had been taken by two young men who didn't know whose names. But the cafe owner had seen the two young men using a blue pickup truck and mentioned their characteristics. Back to the forest, where now Sloane and Katie are approached by Boris, Jed, and the cigarette man. Here, Boris has been told by the sheriff about Sloane and Katie, who are currently being sought by his uncle, who is an FBI agent. Then Boris told the cigarette man to look after them until the sheriff came here, because the sheriff will try to sell them both immediately. When the cigarette man was keeping an eye on Sloane and Katie while waiting for the sheriff, Katie suddenly approached the cigarette man while seducing him. But when she got close, without hesitation, Katie bit the cigarette man's neck until he died instantly. After that, they both immediately took the key from the cigarette man to release the handcuffs that bound them. Not long after, the sheriff came to the place. But he was shocked when he saw the dead cigarette man. He was also upset because the two girls took his car instead. When Sloane and Katie want to return to the city, they accidentally saw two girls who seemed adventurous, just like them. From here, Sloane and Katie finally realized that they had to stop all the crimes of Boris's group, as well as take revenge. Because if left unchecked, the Boris group will definitely continue to commit the same crimes against every woman. After that, they went to the hardware store to buy the necessary equipment, such as nails, hammers, and others. After shopping, they immediately paid with the money they found in the sheriff's car. Then Katie asked the shopkeeper about where Boris's house was. After being told, the two of them immediately rushed there. On the other hand, the uncle was seen going to the car insurance place in the town to continue his investigation. Here the uncle said that he was a member of the FBI who was looking for a blue pickup truck with complete characteristics. After checking, it turned out that the owner of the blue pickup was Boris. The uncle was also finally able to get Boris' address and went straight there. At the same time, Boris had just returned home. He didn't realize that Sloane and Katie were already in his house. Until shortly, Boris was surprised by their presence, who immediately threw tennis balls that had been nailed. When Boris was helpless, they immediately tied him on the table. Here Boris begged not to be killed, and he would give quite a lot of money. Hearing this, Katie and Sloane agreed, as long as Boris also told them who and where the person wearing the pig mask was. But after being told and getting the money, they said that money could not restore their lost honor. Then the two girls prepared an iron spear that had been wielded and stuck it into Boris' ass. At the same time, the uncle also came to Boris' house. But when he went inside, he only saw Boris, who had died very badly. When he came out, the uncle also saw Boris' pickup truck, which was taken away by Katie and Sloane. They both went to a church, because according to Boris' confession, someone wearing a pig mask must be there. When they had just arrived in front of the church, they both were shocked because the person wearing the mask was that man, a pastor. This can be seen from the cross tattoo on that man's hand. Because at the time of the previous incident, Sloane had clearly seen the tattoo on that man's hand. After all the congregation left, Sloane entered the church and immediately confronted that man. That man who did not know her was a woman who raped by him. He even tried to remind Sloane that revenge was not good and was hated by God. But at the same time, Katie suddenly hit his head until he fell. After that, they both left there to find a quiet shop. Sloane and Katie seemed a little satisfied with what they did, considering their chastity was impossible to restore. On the other hand, the uncle returned to meet the sheriff at the police station while reporting what happened to Boris. The sheriff said that he would take care of Boris' case. Meanwhile, Katie and Sloane were still missing. The uncle, who continued to worry about his niece, he immediately tried to call Katie's cell phone again. But unexpectedly, the cell phone rang in the sheriff's pocket, which made the uncle realize that the sheriff was part of the kidnapper group. However, the sheriff immediately pointed a gun at Jason, the uncle. Behind that, Katie and Sloane finally arrived at a shop that was quite desolate, but it turned out that they had been driving while dragging that man. After that, Katie and Sloane went into the store to buy matches. Then they came back out and without hesitation poured gasoline on that man and finished him off. The scene moved to the uncle, who was hostage now in the sheriff's house. The sheriff turns on some very loud music so that his screams can't be heard from outside. Then the sheriff went into the next room. It appears that he has managed to kidnap two other girls as a substitute for Sloane and Katie, who was escape. Until when the sheriff wanted to rape the two girls, suddenly Katie and Sloane beat him from behind. The situation turned over. Here, Katie and Sloane will mentally torture the sheriff by using a game of Russian roulette, which is putting one bullet into a gun and will be fired at the sheriff 5 times. Every time the trigger is pulled, the sheriff screams hysterically, and that made Sloane and Katie feel satisfied. They took turns pulling the trigger while laughing happily. Meanwhile, the uncle didn't know and couldn't hear what was really happening in the next room. Back to Katie and Sloane, who are currently still destroying the sheriff's mentation with their game. Until finally, they are offered a lot of money, as long as they want to let him go. Hearing that, Katie agreed. But after finding out where the sheriff kept his money, Without hesitation, Katie finished off the sheriff. 30 minutes later, the two girls who had been held hostage were released, and they were ordered to free the uncle too. Here the uncle asked who had released them. The two girls replied that they didn't know. What's certain is that the corrupt sheriff was dead. In the evening, Jed and Lucas' biological mother shone drinking tea in the house, but suddenly she felt dizzy and immediately fell unconscious. When she wakes up, she is already in the back shed tied up. After that, the mother is shown the sight of her son Jed, who is now helpless. Apparently, Sloane and Katie had mixed the mother's tea with anesthetic, just as she had done to them in the past. Then, in front of his own mother's eyes, they both beat Jed to death. After killing Jed, Sloane and Katie pushed the mother to another place, and the mother was shown Lucas, her youngest son, who had also been taken like a hostage. Then Sloane pointed a gun at Lucas, then thrust a baseball bat and told him to finish off the mother. Of course, Lucas refused, until Sloane immediately finished Lucas with her gun. After that, they deliberately set up a crime scene, so that the police officers would think that one of the human trafficking groups had committed a mass murder against his own group. In other words, Lucas would be made to look as suspect, amount of he had killed everyone there. Then Lucas would be seen as having chosen to end his own life by suicide. Now it was the mother's turn to be killed. However, before this was done, the mother tried to offer them with a lot of money. However, as usual, after being informed of where the money is, they without hesitation finished off the mother using a lawn machine. Long story short, 1 month later, the uncle returned to visit Katie's house. It wasn't long before Sloane and Katie said goodbye to her mother, because it turned out that they were going to New York to go shopping as they had planned from the beginning. Of course, they both now have a lot of money from the victims they have killed, and the movie ended.